Sydney, Australia. Iconic landmarks, cool neighborhoods, a brand new state-of-the-art metro line, kind of like Melbourne and also kind of not at all. Let's just get right into the first very obvious area where Sydney completely crushes as a city, and that is transit access from the airport. There are train stations underneath both the domestic and international terminals. The international terminal is further out and it still gets you to Sydney Central Station in like 12 minutes and runs like every 6 to 8 minutes. Just world class. So let's start our exploration of Sydney at Central Station, which isn't that central, but is the hub of the entire regional transit system, meaning just about every intercity and regional train line, light rail line, and Sydney's new metro all converge here. I will talk about each of these modes and some of the destinations they'll take you to, but I just want to comment on the iconography. Transport for New South Wales literally uses L, T, and M to let you know which mode is available where, and F at the ferry terminals. I just never find this all that helpful, just give me the route numbers. But let's start with light rail. It's relatively new. The first line opened in 1997. You catch line 1 up on the Grand Concourse level at Central, and you catch lines 2 and 3 out of Chalmers Street along the east edge of the station. Line 1 is the original and kind of skirts around the south edge of the Central Business District, through the Haymarket area and Darling Square. These are interesting areas. I know I saw the word Chinatown somewhere. Are we still doing that? Seems a little reductive and unsavory. Anyway, in Darling Square, you do get this cool bird's nest building that has a food hall at the base and a 2-story public library above, where you can chill out for a couple hours reading environmental impact statements for the next metro line. Further north on Line 1, Darling Harbour in the Piermont neighborhood. You'll find the fish market here, which has its own stop. Line 1 actually has a pretty wild alignment. It loops through Piermont, making a bunch of stops, including this one that's in the basement of a casino hotel. Its public-private partnership's gone wild. Speaking of hotels, I didn't realize until I got here that most of the time you're looking for a pub, what you really want to Google is hotel. I don't completely understand this. It was evident in Melbourne too, but especially here in Sydney. Something to do with the licensing requirements and the early 20th century temperance movement, but the upshot is, if you come in looking for a guest room, you're probably in the wrong place. Light rail lines 2 and 3 go north from Central Station through the heart of the CBD and all the way to Circular Quay, which is important and I'll come back and talk about later in the video. Now, there's a lot I like about Sydney, but I have to say, the CBD just doesn't feel nearly as cohesive and well-defined as Melbourne's. There's a Westfield Mall with a Westfield Observation Tower, just not very well integrated into the transit system. I honestly didn't spend that much time in the CBD because really the most interesting stuff to see in Sydney just isn't here, except photo ops maybe. Well, okay, and the Queen Victoria building, which is cool enough to get its own light rail station. The QVB is like a mega arcade or like an early iteration of the shopping mall concept. Kind of the Australian version of the Galleria Vittoria Emanuele in Milan. Very elegant and also a model train store, so now you have to go. The QVB actually has a below street level connection to Town Hall Station. The trains run underground in this part of the CBD and you might have to go down a couple levels of tracks depending on what train you're trying to catch. By the way, we are eventually going to check out the longest escalator in the Southern Hemisphere, but this isn't it. Let's come back to Central Station and talk a bit about the regional train network. It is set up a bit like Melbourne's network with a loop around the CBD, Central Station at the south end of the loop, Circular Quay at the north end, and some minor but cool stations in between. But it's really Central Station that's the crux. Most of the regional trains, including Line 8 to the airport, are accessible by this underground concourse with escalators up to the platforms, and most of the intercity trains depart from the Grand Concourse, which, in my opinion, lives up to its name. Kind of like in Melbourne, they've adopted these portrait-style departure boards that scroll through the destinations on each line, departure times, platform numbers. It just makes it very easy to navigate Central Station, which is important because it's kind of a labyrinth otherwise. By the way, Transport for New South Wales does have a branded fare payment system, Opal, but unlike the state of Victoria, New South Wales has joined the 21st century and will let you just tap on and off with your phone or watch. By the way, express transit card enabled on your watch, kind of a cheat code, just not in Melbourne. A couple notes about the trains themselves. They're double-decker, so if you're sitting on the lower level, you get a great view of people's feet. Not all that great for shooting video. The upper deck, on the other hand, great vantage for filming all the different stations. I might just have to make a supercut out of all the footage I got. It just doesn't fit here. Also, the carriages are 5 seats wide. I just don't often see rolling stock that's both 5 wide and double-decker, but enlighten me down in the comments. Let's hit a few of the key destinations on the rail network. Next stop, up the main trunk line from Central, Redfern Station. The Redfern neighborhood itself, pretty cool, and the station is right next to South Eveleigh, which is an entire adaptive reuse district built out of the former Eveleigh Railway workshops. The buildings are super interesting. There are brew pubs, coffee shops, and IGA, which I didn't even know was a thing on this side of the globe. You can embarrass yourself by taking a metalworking class in full view of the public. Definitely a worthwhile destination if you're a foamer, or I guess here they call them gunzels. I'm not going to explain it, just look it up yourself. A little further out, Newtown Station. This one's interesting in that there are a couple of high streets that converge here, and you don't even really have to look it up to know that trams ran here in the first half of the 20th century, but I did look it up. This is King Street, and it does have some of the charm of the Melbourne high streets. And yeah, the buses that run here actually pull to the curb instead of loading and unloading in the middle of the street. So maybe operationally superior to trams in a sense, but the vibes are just a little off. Same on Enmore Street, which also converges on Newtown Station. Great spot for record shopping, apparently. And I went out to the suburban center of Parramatta just to prove I'm not a city snob. There's some density around Parramatta Station, and it's a big transfer point on Sydney's regional rail network. But the most obvious thing about it is it has a direct underground connection to yet another Westfield mall. And this is a huge one, but I feel like no matter how big a mall is, it's really just a cinnamon roll delivery system. So fine, I am a confirmed city snob, so let's go back to Central and begin our exploration of Sydney's Metro line, an outer segment of which opened in 2019, but we're going to focus on the segment that opened this past August, which runs through the central part of Sydney, including literally central. And yes, this escalator down to the new platforms 26 and 27 is now the longest one in the southern hemisphere, so mystery solved. Fun fact, I'm told the patterns on the walls around the escalator are designed to prevent Metro users from getting vertigo on their way up and down. People, I'm bringing you the most cutting-edge transit technology. So, the Sydney Metro. Modern stations with platform screen doors? Yes. Helpful active signage inside the carriages? Yes. Did they let architects go nuts with some of the new stations? Absolutely. Gadigal, further north into the CBD. If Australian film producers aren't using this to shoot dystopian limited-run streaming series for Netflix, then what are they even doing? Martin Place, also a super deep station with an interchange to Train Line 4. Kind of corporate, but with some connecting corridors that double as art installations. Let's continue our non-exhaustive tour of the new metro stations. Barangaroo, interesting station location, very close to the harbourfront, which kind of cuts into the ideal pedestrian catchment area you want for an infrastructure investment like this, but the harbourfront is such an amazing amenity in this city. Something I haven't mentioned yet, Sydney has a much more lush, tropical feel than Melbourne does, with all the pluses and minuses that come with that, and we'll discuss that more later in the video. These are all deep stations, partly because we have to get under the harbor, and I'm skipping a couple stations here, but I wanted to check out Crow's Nest. This is another neighborhood and another high street, Willoughby Road, that had tram service once upon a time. And a tram here would be cool, but would I trade a brand spanking new metro station for it? Probably not. This is actually a spot where I think it's interesting to look at some before and afters. Like, this stuff is so new, it's not even in Street View yet, but looking at what was here a couple years ago does give you a feel for what the region is trying to do with street frontages when they get a chance to start over from scratch. This is as good a point as any to talk about a couple things that were more prevalent in Sydney than there were anywhere else I went on this trip. 1. Raised crosswalks. I talked about these in my Hoboken video, but they were not widespread there. In Sydney, you see them so often that it feels like both pedestrians and drivers have a high level of familiarity and know exactly how to behave when they encounter one. 2. These high pedestrian activity zones that are accompanied by speed limits. These go as low as 10 kilometers per hour, which is like 6 miles an hour. But this one off Enmore Road, 50 kilometers per hour. Not sure about that one. And 3. Red light speed cameras and photo radar. I saw a lot of these signs, and it might be worth making a whole other video about how Australian states use demerit points and accumulation to suspend people's licenses. Kind of like yellow card accumulation in soccer, except much better because you're disqualifying drivers. If you have arguments against systems like this, put it down in the comments where people who are not me can read them. Back to the metro. My next stop was Chatswood, a major transfer point to the north where you can switch between the metro and a couple different train lines. This one's interesting because you can actually do a cross-platform transfer between the metro and the regional train. One side has platform screen doors, the other, not really. The area around Chatswood Station is pretty diverse, and if you go on the right day of the week, there's a street market happening on the pedestrianized part of Victoria Avenue where it approaches the station. It all looked pretty tasty in general, but I was not about to get fooled by Australian paella again. By the way, takeaway sushi at train stations. This was a thing everywhere in Sydney and Melbourne, and I recommend we adopt it in the States. Oh, and I almost forgot. Of course, there's a Westfield Mall right at Chatswood Station. How could it be otherwise? And this is as good a time as any to mention that Australia has TK Maxx, not TJ Maxx. And the big burger chain is Hungry Jack's, which is incredibly confusing because it looks like Burger King, but sounds like Jack in the Box. This is definitely not a McDonald's. The mall has a Wendy's, but it isn't Wendy's. For that matter, Woolworths isn't Woolworths. The Good Guys is a consumer electronics store, but not the one that existed in North America in the 1990s. Kmart is Kmart, but no longer exists in North America. Duty King, however, does exist, and my most fervent hope is that it enters the US market soon. Last stop I made on the metro, Eppington, also an interchange with a regional train line, just not a cool cross-platform one. The metro is underground here, and the train is in a trench. You can go several stops further out on the metro, but just being real, once you've been to Duty King, what more do you really need to see? Now, metros are cool, but really my favorite thing when I visit a city is just to hang out in neighborhoods. I actually came to Sydney twice while I was here and stayed in 2 different neighborhoods. One, Surrey Hills, walking distance east from Central Station, but you can take lines 1 and 2, although questionable whether it's going to be faster than just walking. There's lots of biking in and through Surrey Hills, especially this protected 2-way bike lane on Bourke Street. And there's tons of pedestrian activity, especially on Crown Street, which is really the high street in this neighborhood, and yes, once featured a tram line. There's tons of middle-type housing in Surrey Hills, and I saw some of this in Melbourne too, but this style was really widespread in the inner neighborhoods in Sydney. It's kind of a similar gentle density to what Montreal has. Another thing evident in Sydney's inner neighborhoods, they are very green, and it's a tropical kind of green, like the street trees are just absolute monsters. The flip side here is you do get tropical type downpours. I don't like actually filming in the rain, but one thing I discovered was Sydney has this whole protocol around bringing umbrellas indoors. They roll out these swipers that dry your umbrella, and then you use this contraption to sheath your umbrella in a plastic baggie. Compact on the left, long boy on the right. Man, I've lived in the Pacific Northwest of the US basically my entire life, and I've just never seen this technology before. America, we're losing our edge. Oh, just next door to Surrey Hills, I went to an open street Saturday. This was absolutely insane. It's kind of like Montreal's program that they do in a bunch of neighborhoods all summer long. Well, almost like that, except Sydney does it for just one day and then moves on to another neighborhood the next month. I'm just gonna go out on a limb and suggest that maybe they add more days to soak up the demand because evidence suggests that there's a slight possibility that people like this. 364 more days a year might do the trick. Further north, the neighborhood I stayed in when I came back to Sydney at the tail end of my trip, Potts Point. I stayed on the ground level of this apartment building because I'm on a tight budget, but I had access to the rooftop, and I don't know what you can say, but this is a pretty spectacularly beautiful city. Unfortunately, I often had company on the rooftop. You may already be aware that I have a troubled relationship with birds. It's nothing personal, it's just they're extremely stupid and they make very obnoxious noises. Bats, on the other hand, awesome, and Sydney is very well provisioned on those. Anyway, Potts Point, great neighborhood, tons of doggos out and about. The local Woolies is very dog friendly. The streets are lovely. There are some pedestrianized alleyways around the King's Cross train station. I believe the station only dates from 1979 when the Eastern Suburbs extension of Line 4 opened. It's nearly all underground all the way into Central Station, and I'm just endlessly fascinated by subway ads in foreign countries. You kind of get a forced immersion into a completely different way of life while you're just waiting for a train. Meat pie flavored chips, you can't say no. Just try me, Australia. Just try me. Still more to come because, well, I haven't even talked about ferries yet, and there's other stuff that's just too good not to share. Engage the channel and connect in all the customary ways. You know, when I mentioned on the usual apps that I was coming to Auckland and Melbourne and Sydney, there was plenty of enthusiasm to do a live event in the first two cities, but Sydney was just crickets. Just one of the conundrums of being an urbanism creator type. There are some cities that just don't love you back. Sniff. I'm not bitter though, there was just too much to do. I'm not going to give you Google reviews of tourist attractions today, but also I'm definitely not going to go all the way to Australia and not see animals. And if I have enough time in a city after spending hours filming like raised crosswalks, I do like to get a little culture. The Art Gallery of New South Wales, very cool. There was a special exhibition by the Chinese multimedia artist Cao Fei. Check that out if it comes to your city. The Australian Museum, also cool, focuses on natural history but had an exhibit on the future city. I love dioramas, and people's visions for what the urban future looks like are always super interesting. I also love cows. The museum also allows you to read up on Australians who have made positive cultural or scientific contributions to civilization. I'm not sure about all of these, but I'm no one to judge. Actually, on the walk back to your Potts Point apartment, you might pass Harry's Cafe to Wheels, purveyor apparently of Sydney's finest meat pies, and you can take a gander at the collage of American dignitaries who have partaken. In case you're wondering, yes, I did go all the way to Australia and not see the Great Barrier Reef or Uluru or anywhere else that you essentially have to drive hundreds of miles to get to and then look at for a while. You guys, I like cities. It's my whole personality. But I did take an intercity train out of Central Station a couple hours west to the town of Katoomba in the Blue Mountains. Even the intercities are tap on and off with your watch or phone. It's like $6 Aussie. The train ride itself is beautiful. And when you get to Katoomba Station, there's pretty decent bus frequency to get wherever you need to go in a town with a population of about 8,000. Now, the place you want to go is called Scenic World, and it is scenic, but the real reason you want to go is because it is gadget bond heaven. They give you all kinds of ways to get every possible view of the coolest natural features of the Blue Mountains. This includes the Scenic Railway, which claims to be the world's steepest, allows you to customize your launch angle, and apparently allowed extremely disturbing animals at one point. At the bottom of the railway is the scenic walkway, and let's just state the obvious here. There's a good chance you're going to come all the way to Katoomba, and the weather is going to make it impossible to see any of the supposed scenery. I was here for the rides, though. You can take the scenic railway / funicular type thing back up to the visitor center, or you can take the scenic cableway up there. And just imagine how cool the views would be if there were more than like 10 feet of visibility. And there's the Scenic Skyway, which is an aerial tram that crosses the gorge and supposedly gives you a great view of Katoomba Falls. Difficult to say. You know what though, the weather changes pretty fast up here, so if you hang around long enough, eventually you'll probably get the views you came for. It's a 2-hour train ride back to Central Station. The trains run every hour or better, depending on time of day. So check the return schedule, and if you're early, you'll have plenty of company on the platform. Okay, I certainly cannot do a Sydney video without talking about Circular Quay. This is at the north end of the city's central rail loop. It's the terminus of light rail lines 1 and 2, and it's where you're going to catch just about any ferry you want to take. Also, big cruise ship dock and views of the harbor bridge and the opera house, which are exceedingly Instagrammable. This is all another way of saying Circular Quay is extremely touristy, but pretty justifiably so. Now, I'm not going to do an exhaustive review of every possible destination you can get to on the ferries, but I took a few. It is the same tap-on, tap-off system used for all the other public transportation in Sydney. And really, the destinations are great. I did take a ferry to get to the zoo on the north side of the harbor, but half the fun is just the views you get en route to wherever you're going. And not just the obvious stuff around the city center. The ferries give you a completely different sense of the city, the urban form of the neighborhoods and suburbs out to the east, toward the Pacific. It all feels very urban and very tropical at the same time. It's not really comparable to anything in North America. I guess Miami is the first thing that comes to mind, but the vibe is very different as you get out toward the coast. You can take the ferry to smaller communities like Watson's Bay. You're definitely still well within the Sydney metro area, but it feels like you're like 100 miles outside the city. Now, I did not get to the world-famous Bondi Beach because, honestly, the transit connectivity is lacking, but there is all kinds of ferry service to Manly Beach. You can take the F1, which is the standard service between Circular Quay and Manly, and it's a 22-minute ride, or you can take the Manly Fast Ferry, which is a 20-minute ride. Honestly, just catch whatever boat leaves first. The ferry drops you on the harbor side of the narrow spit of land that separates the harbor from the Pacific Ocean, and then you walk along a pedestrianized street, the Corso, to get to the beach. The Corso is pretty lively, even on a weekday, and it sort of gives the feel of the kind of Mediterranean resort towns that pasty English people go to on snowbird vacations. In other words, a bit tropical, but with pubs. Manly is great though. The beach is also packed on weekdays. They take their beach volleyball very seriously here. And there's a great two-way multi-use path along the beachfront. You know, I never did bike here, mostly because I just don't trust myself to remember to stay on the left. I also didn't really see the monstrous arachnids I'd heard horror stories about, but I had enough trouble with other local wildlife. Well, not this guy. We've got no beef. Nah, I'm talking about the winged variety. Like, really, turkeys? You gotta be kidding. It's a good thing that when you've seen enough, it's only 22 minutes to get back to civilization, even on the slow ferry. And it should go without saying, trains that take 12 minutes to get from the city's central station to the international terminal at the airport, 5 stars. But actual airplane flights, let alone trans-Pacific ones that take 15 hours, I'll leave that evaluation to the latest episode of Abolish Everything, which is simply called Abolish Airplanes. The way Abolish Everything works is a guest is invited on stage to argue for the abolition of some loathsome aspect of modern life. For example, airplanes or overpriced canned water. The guest is cross-examined by a panel of skeptical comedians, the political establishment, to dig into the successes and shortcomings of, for example, the commercial airline industry. And finally, a winning guest is awarded a comically large sack of play money based on live audience response according to the highly scientific Cheerometer 3000. The show is tons of fun with a different mix of very funny guests every episode. Abolish Everything is a Nebula original show and exclusive to the platform. Now, the content I recommend when I talk about Nebula is usually urbanism related, and there are lots of great city planning, architecture, and engineering related creators on the platform, but Nebula does so many other things well, and it's also where you can get Jetlag's new special, Hide and Seek Across New York, before it shows up anywhere else. So Nebula is a place where you can find big, ambitious, highly entertaining projects, and you can find smaller creators that work in niche topic areas you love. Since I joined the Nebula community of creators, it's really helped me grow and connect with new audiences. And when you subscribe, it really helps support what I do. And keep in mind, signing up isn't just a great way to invest in the creators you enjoy, it's also an investment in continuing to make the Nebula streaming experience itself better and better. Because yes, Nebula is kind of like Netflix for people who are a little too into trains, but on a deeper level, it's a haven for content that's a little more thoughtful, with a pretty big idea behind all of it, raising the level of the entire platform and growing it into a prestige streaming service. So if you use my custom link down in the description or the QR code right here on screen, you're gonna get the best deal. All the Nebula content for 40% off the regular price when you sign up for an annual subscription, so $36 or $3 a month, and the lifetime offer is still active. $300, you pay once, and you get Nebula for as long as both you and Nebula exist. Nebula subscribers also get guest passes, one every month or 3 per quarter if you're on annual or lifetime. Once active, guests can binge all the Nebula content they want for a week, and no payment info is required. Signing up for Nebula really is a fantastic way to demonstrate your support for a one-of-a-kind creator-owned platform and to fund the continued production of amazing originals. And there's great new stuff hitting the platform all the time. So my recommendation, use my custom link or the QR code right here to get 40% off. That's $36 a year or $3 a month. It's nebula.tv/CityNerd, and then go watch the latest installment of Abolish Everything right now. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons whose direct support gives me the freedom to mix things up and the flexibility to vary my release schedule when I have travel to work around. Patreon is always the first place I let people know about upcoming travel plans, so consider joining up. But in any case, keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode in the next week or two, and I'll see you then.